Hello everyone, my name is Andrew Nobbins and this is walkthrough number 7 of my virtual reality project featuring the sets from Space 1999. This update is not going to be as grand as previous updates, but it has a certain quality of life to it, and that is a lot of this paperwork, some of the equipment that you see on the desk there, the carts that you see there. It all just brings that sort of lived-in feel to the environment, and even though it's kind of minor, it has a big impact, I think, on the feel when you're in here. So usually after each update, I really don't know where I'm going to go with the next additions that I make to the project, and this was no exception. But of all things that triggered this round of changes, it was the cups that we see here on this conference table. So here we have these Gabbianelli cups, and I did these cups, or a version of the cups, in the previous update. And then soon after I posted that update, I got an email from a lady in Canada. Her name was Georgia, and she expressed some interest in this ComLock, which you can see here. And in that exchange of emails, it became evident that she also had an interest in these cups. And in fact, she had contacted the manufacturer in Italy and got them to send her a catalogue which had some overall dimensions. And I didn't realize this at all when I did my first version of the cups, but there are actually two different sizes. And so there was a teacup, which was a slightly larger version, and then the coffee cup was a slightly smaller version of that Gabbianelli cup. Now, the two cups had different saucers, and as you can see here, the teacup had this traditional circular saucer, and the coffee cup had this very fancy, futuristic, sort of bespoke saucer for the coffee cup, which had a little spot there designed for the teaspoon. And so once I'd gotten that information, and Georgia supplied, or she had some really good photos from, I think, eBay and just various websites of what the saucers look like and all of that sort of stuff. So it was just great having that information. And so I gladly redid the cups and the saucers and all the rest and put them into this project in a much more accurate way. So having done those cups, that is then what triggered me to think, well, I really should just finish doing all of the little bits and pieces that make this thing feel lived in. And that's why I added the additional keyboard that you see there, and the Eagle Transporter remote control unit that you see there on the left. Over there in the distance, there's another keyboard, and then those two carts up against the computer wall. So the paperwork that you see here inside these translucent plastic sleeves, when you look at the photos from the show, I think they weren't so prevalent in the early episodes of season 1, but they sort of introduced them more and more as they went along. Now, having done them, they came out really bright and colourful, and I felt that this was just too strong. It just felt like it didn't fit. But I'll show you in a second some photos from the TV show, and they definitely were very bright, very red and blue and cyan, and so I'm still not used to the color of them, but I'm pretty sure it's how they were. So they're going to have to stay. And even here on Koenig's desk, it just seems too cartoony. But they were really bright, vivid folders that sat on the table in these various positions. And then here you can see them again spread out over the table. So before I talk about any of the other stuff, let's just quickly do a rundown on these paperwork. So if I come over here and turn on the screenshots from the TV show, you can see here in this shot, I pretty much modeled the paperwork based off of this shot for that conference table. And you can see, I mean, the blue and the reds, they're really vivid, and the cyan and the yellow. It was really vivid in the TV show. Now, they had extra paperwork sitting on the table, which I haven't bothered to do, and I don't think I will. And you can also see it was really quite a reflective sort of plastic, which if I move my head around, you can see the reflections, particularly in here. Now, so I'll just do a quick run around, see if I can find some. So in this shot, obviously, there's no paperwork on the desk. In this shot, there's heaps of paperwork, and again, you see how vivid the colors were. Again, some more paperwork there. And clearly, bright blue, bright red. In this shot, you can see how I've got the red, yellow, cyan, and then there's the red, yellow, cyan there. It appears to be a red one in that little drawer area there. If we come over here, we've got a cyan and red and that there, and then more of the same. Again, they seem to prefer the red ones, and I did try to make the majority of the sleeves red. A yellow one there, and so on. There were different types of clipboards and things, and I didn't do the clipboards. I pretty much just did the paper sleeves as we see them there. And again, red and blue that we see there. And I think very bright cyan one there. In this shot here, particularly, I wanted to point out that you can just make out some red stuff there, which I think was possibly that red one there. So, as you can see, there were plenty of cases where they had sprinkled these sleeves all over the place. Now, to talk, let's just turn that off. To talk about the actual modeling process for these sleeves, on the Catacombs website, they listed a few types of paperwork that were often seen, and sometimes they'd mentioned that there was maybe sometimes a medical form, and there were a few other things that they listed. But one of the really good photos that they had was of this one, and this is a rank Xerox order form for different coloured toners and different size paper. And so they had a reasonably good photo of this. It was still blurry. I couldn't read the small text, but I could see that the rough shape of the form and most of the stuff. So in a lot of cases, the text was the small text was very difficult to read, but it was surprising how you could make out the rough form of the word and just guess what it might be. And I think I got pretty close, like in this paragraph here, but in particular. Some of these other small writing, I couldn't really tell what that was. And then up here, this small writing here was so small, I just couldn't see that. And so I just decided to not even try to guess what it said. And I just, as you can see, I've got A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and so on. But all the other stuff that you can see, I pretty much could make out from the form. And here, Mrs. Pierce, I couldn't really tell. There was a name, and then there was a Mrs. somebody's name. I couldn't tell. It either said Prince or Pierce or something. I don't think I've got it right. But yeah. So this form is pretty accurate to what was on the TV show. this form here, in fact, you can probably see better here. This one I made up, and this one is basically a refreshments, Spacer-Mat refreshments order form. And what I did was, Spacer-Mat really refers to, if I come over here to the little alcove, this is the Spacer-Mat liquid dispenser, and we have these drinks that you can order. I assumed that Spacer-Mat might be a refreshments company, and let me just come over here. In creating this form, I used that company name and for refreshments. And so you can order cold drinks, hot drinks, and confectionery. And for the confectionery, I chose space-themed candy bars, which I'm sure all staff members on Minbase Alpha just loved to eat. So this form is made up, whereas that form is accurate to the TV show as much as I could get it. I did do a third form, and that third form is present in this file card, but we'll talk about that later. There is an interesting little bug that I had, and again, this is getting really pedantic now, but my modeling software, I use architectural modeling software, it's called MicroStation, and the way that the workflow is usually, I model the stuff and then I export it to a file format called FBX, and that is imported into Unity, and Unity is the game engine that creates this virtual environment. Normally, that rectangle would just be a rectangle. It's just a shape which is probably split into two triangles, and that's it. But for these forms, I actually had to be able to do something special, and that is I had to be able to, and here's some examples, I had to be able to bend the forms over edges and up edges, and that bending process causes problems with how the texture maps are mapped onto the geometry. Now, my architectural modeling software doesn't have something called UV unwrapping, which is what a lot of programs like Blender and Maya and so on have, and so they have a much more powerful way of mapping textures onto geometry, no matter how it's deformed. MicroStation doesn't have UV unwrapping or manual UV unwrapping, so I don't have as many options in terms of how texture maps are mapped onto deformed geometry. So to be able to deform the geometry and keep the texture mapped to it even after it's deformed, I used a certain element type called a B-spline surface, and B-spline stands for Bezier spline surfaces, and unfortunately the export routine that MicroStation uses to export this B-spline surface, it causes uneven, how do I say it, uneven mapping of the texture. So here, here we've got the staff ID, the department, the duty roster. These little boxes where you're supposed to write your name and whatever, they're all meant to be the same size, and yet you can see here horizontally it bunches in the middle and then it gets stretched out on the edge and on the edge. And the same thing happens vertically here. This field, this field here is much wider there than it is there, and yet they should all be the same width. So the texture is bunched up here and stretched out on the edge. So that's a minor little bug, which, who knows if anybody ever would have even noticed it. But I tried different things to correct it. I guess I could have gone into Photoshop and manually warped my texture so that then it gets de-warped, but I wasn't going to do that. So that's a minor little bug with the way that particular texture gets mapped onto this geometry. And really, in all, my whole project, I really haven't used B-splines in this way in very many cases at all. So this project as a whole doesn't have this problem with the texturing, because I haven't really used B-splines for other things. So that was a curious little fact about that, those textures on the paperwork. Now, the other bug, I would say, that I've got with this paperwork is related to how the shadows and the lighting is calculated. And this bug is not related to MicroStation or my architectural modeling software. This bug is related to how Unity does things. Now, I tried... Okay, so typically in this scene, everything is static. All the geometry is static, and you can't move things around. So if I come over here and I try to pick this up, I can't move it around. The only exception would be these items here, which I'll talk about later. And so these items you can pick up and move around. So those are not static objects, they are dynamic, but everything else is static. And because everything else is static, in fact, I've had to make everything else static because the way the lighting is in this environment. And I've touched on this before, but this environment is unique in the sense that there is, it's not illuminated by the sun. It's actually illuminated by these panels. So these are all area lights, and the entire surface contributes to the illumination of this space. And area lights cannot be calculated in real time in game engines. And so they have to be pre-calculated during a phase called light baking. And the light baking takes, for this environment, I do it overnight. You know, it takes, and I set, for the final build of the project, I set the quality up quite high enough so that you don't get blotchiness and things like that. And so it takes maybe 15 hours to calculate the light baking for this environment. Basically, again, for the technical amongst you, after I do the light baking, I end up having about, from memory, I think it was either 11 or 15 4K textures. So that's a lot of graphics card memory that is used to do the shading, the shadows in this environment. But anyway, so I pre-bake the lighting, and the only way that that can work is if everything is static and doesn't move. And so here you can see underneath the table there's some really nice shadows happening underneath the table, you know, really subtle and realistic. Whereas over here in this dynamic geometry, there is no realistic shadows. And so this comes, so now we come back to my problem with these paperwork. I tried setting the paperwork up as static geometry that would then receive light and shadow from the environment. And it should have worked, but there was a problem. And basically, if you look at how I've modeled this geometry, I actually have modeled, you can see that it has an upper, I don't know if you can see it in that, but the plastic actually does wrap around over the top and then underneath and along the bottom. And then inside the plastic is the actual paper geometry. That, I think maybe that the tolerances are just too small, and Unity couldn't do the light baking well enough, and there was some really bad shadow blotches all over the place, just really inaccurate shading. So in the end, I had to turn that off. I had to turn off the static nature of this geometry, and I had to make it dynamic so that it doesn't receive light and shadow from the environment, and it just receives a generic illumination, non-directional, you know, irrespective of what geometry is near it. And it kind of looks okay, I guess, but with the one downside of that is that it literally doesn't take on the shadows of the geometry around it. So you get this problem here where here is a plastic sleeve inside this little drawer shelf area thing, and where this should all be in darkness now, it's not. It's illuminated just as much as these ones that are up here on exposed to the whole environment. And so you see that here, you see it over there in that yellow one. That should also be darker, but it's not. I chose to live with that compromise because the blotchy shadows were so bad with my first attempt. Hopefully in the future I'll find a better way to do that. So that's one bug in Unity. The other bug is, and you can see it here, yeah, actually you can, let's look at this one over here. We'll look at this one. Here we go. Yeah. This is the other bug. As I move my head, you can see the yellow plastic at the moment is rendering properly, but then at a different angle, the yellow plastic all of a sudden doesn't have priority because it's on the top, and the plastic underneath it, the red plastic, seems to become visible, as you can see there. And this, again, I think that might be related to how close the geometry is to, I mean, it's about, I think in the end I've got about 1 millimeter apart. I just haven't worked out how to fix that problem. I've tried separating it even more, but you can't separate it too much because then the thing starts to look like it's just floating in midair. So that's another bug that I'm having with Unity, and here in this one, I mean this yellow one is on top, so that should be yellow there, and with this one I can't even find a particular angle where the yellow is correctly on top. And the geometry is definitely on top. There's no question about, let's see if I can. Actually, you know what? I may have got that yellow below. I may have to fix that. I thought I'd done all that. I thought I'd checked that. All right, well, this one might be my fault, but that one definitely isn't, as you can see here. And now this one, I can't even make it fail. It's also random. It's part of the frustration. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Which is why I thought that was oh no, look, it now works. The yellow is on top. It was on top, and now it's underneath, and now it's on top. I don't know what's going on. It's so it's frustrating because you think you know what's going on, and then it's not. So the paperwork is in place. There's minor issues with it. I'm living with them for now. Hopefully I'll find a solution in the future. So that's the paperwork, and in fact the paperwork, as you can see, is here on these desks, and then I've also added the paperwork to the reception desk over here, as you can see here, and we have the same problem with the and in fact if I move my head around you can see the colors swap. Like I said, I just one day I'll work out what's going on. So and I haven't over here in the travel tube, I haven't done any changes to the travel tube since last time, and it's probably worth turning on the screenshots again, and so here you can see in this screenshot there's the reception desk with more of the plastic sleeves on it. So they were clearly sprinkled all over the place. And then also this coffee cup has the updated saucer and steam coming off the cup. Nice subtle little effect. Okay, so now back to main mission. And that was the paperwork and the cups. Now, before I go on to the additions here, I did make one other change to Commander Koenig's office, and that relates to this globe. I used to have two additional options for the globe. There were, as you can see here, we've got an Earth globe and a Moon globe. I did have two other Earth globes. There was a night version and a day version. The night version looked really bad, and the day version just looked out of place. Really, it was really bright green and blue and totally out of place in this environment. So I got rid of those two options, and now we just have the Earth globe and the Moon globe. Now, the Moon globe, I did have another stab at creating a texture for the Moon globe that was stylized in keeping with the stylized nature of this globe. So here you can see the Moon globe, and if I get close you can see I've got some bumpiness on it. But what I did for the Moon globe was I went to NASA's website and I found a high-resolution height map of the Moon. And so the height map was really just light pixels were high regions on the Moon and dark pixels were low regions on the Moon. And then I took that into Photoshop and I converted the colors to about 16 different shades of gray just to make it look a little bit more cartoony. And then I used the edge finding filter in Photoshop to generate these dark outlines around the different colors. And so that then created this texture that looks like that. The main thing is I wanted to make it stylized. There was no point trying to make it like the Earth globe because, I mean, Earth we have clearly land and water, whereas the Moon, there's just, you know, one dry surface. So how do you keep a little bit of interest for the Moon? And so I went with this approach. Interestingly, I have no idea where the North Pole is on the Moon or the South Pole, but what you can do is go to the Earth globe and go to the South Pole of Earth globe and then go back to Moon globe, and that's the South Pole of the Moon. And then if we rotate the Moon and take our best guess of where the North Pole might be, so the North Pole would be somewhere there, and if I go back to Earth, okay, so there's North Pole somewhere in there, and then go back to Moon, so that would be the North Pole of the Moon. So that was the change to the Moon or the globe, and if you've seen my other walkthroughs, I've had multiple stabs at doing that globe, and hopefully this is the last attempt. Okay, so now let me just rotate this around. Okay, so now we've got the additions in terms of the equipment. So you can see here on the desks, I've got an additional keyboard. Next to that I've got the remote control unit for the Eagle transporter, and over there on the far corner is another keyboard. And then over here next to the computer wall is the other two carts. So here we have a cart which on the Catacombs website is called the Bobby cart, and they conveniently pointed out that this cart is still in production. So I was able to actually go on the internet and find a lot of photos of this cart. The photos were very similar to what was shown in the TV show, but there were some minor differences, and so I was able to use the details from the internet photos and the vague photos that I had, screen captures that I had from the Blu-ray discs of the TV show, and make this version of the cart, which I think is actually pretty accurate to what was on the TV show. You can see the cart was actually intended to be very modular in construction, and so you could just mix and match different components to make different variants. But the idea was that this was, well, that was one module, and then that clips into the next module like a piece of Lego, and then that clipped into the next module. And you can even see here these little recesses and tabs and so on, and then the recess around the lip there, and as it goes all the way around there, that recess would then key into that recess would be reproduced in this brown region, and that would be keyed into the bottom of this unit like a piece of Lego. And so with that approach, if you had and again on the internet there was a white color, red, black, all sorts of options, but on the internet they were clearly one bit of injected molded plastic. So really this in here should all be one color, and yet on the TV show it wasn't. The TV show had this as white and it had that as white inside there, but then they had brown on the outside. So I think what they did on the TV show is they used white modules and then they simply painted that brown, because if they were to use a brown piece, just as this is all white up here, this should have been all brown instead of being two-toned across there. And then this should have been all white instead of having that brown lip. So I'm pretty sure they didn't do that. They had white for the whole thing and then they just painted, I think, brown across there. The other thing to notice is that this void here finishes along that wall, and likewise this void finishes along that wall, which means that underneath this rectangle there's a void that we have no access to in this version of the Space 1999 Bobby cart. The thing is, the internet version that I found, they actually had a circular opening here which gave you access to this void underneath this rectangle, which is very different from what the TV shows, the TV show shows. I think what the TV show had, they actually had, so this is all filled in here, but they had a little hole, I think, in the top of this plastic here which gave you access to this void. I don't know, it was difficult to tell what was going on. But so this is the cart, and you know, it had these casters with this gap in here so the caster had room to move. And then underneath you can see this steel tube would go up and be expressed in those three places. These stickers, this is the usual trick that they did on the TV show. They got the Letraset sheets and they stuck on the alphabet that was on the Letraset stuff to make it look, so from a distance it looks like it means something, but in reality it's just the alphabet. So that sticker was there, and you can see, you know, I've got a sort of reflective finish on the transparency there. So that sticker, and I think they had one here as well there. And in fact, you can see in this sticker that shadowing, that blotchiness, that's actually a little bit like the problem that I was having with the blotchiness on this transparent plastic, except on this transparent plastic it was really bad. On this one, it wasn't bad enough for me to approach the problem differently, and in fact, it kind of makes it look a little bit worn or, you know, lived in sort of thing. So this sticker, I think, is pretty close. I couldn't make out exactly some of that smaller writing. That sticker is accurate. So that one's pretty close, I think. That one's close. This yellow one, I couldn't make it out at all, the writing on the yellow sticker. So that's definitely wrong, that one. Here you can see these I call them memory sticks, memory modules, and those memory sticks are the same ones that we see, let me just rotate this, the same ones that we see here in Commander Koenig's desk, and they're the same ones that we see here on the I've already forgotten what you call that. The computer post thingy. So So it's the same ones that we see there. And then I've also included those memory sticks over here on Kano's desk, and here, but as it turns out, they are not right. I've seen in some photos since I've done this desk that this actually is a printer readout thing. So you have printer paper coming out of here. I don't know if I'll fix that at some stage, maybe. So the reason I mentioned that is because here on the computer wall, we have those same memory modules that I've put into that location. And so the idea is that there they are. You can swap them in and out. This is actually the only location on the computer wall where this panel type exists. Normally, these panels are repeated many times throughout the whole wall, but this is the only one that exists just one time, and here it is. So that's the Bobby cart. I think it turned out pretty well and accurate to the TV show. Now over here we have the file cart. And again, this turned out, I think, pretty accurately to what was shown in the TV show. It feels small, but I'm pretty sure I've got the size correctly scaled. And in fact, usually you see one of the actresses, pushing this cart, and I think she's quite a small lady, so the scale is probably correct. I mean, for me, I'm 193 centimeters tall, so for me, this feels small, but I think I've got the scale correct. Now, so this cart was, it had these sort of asymmetric casters, which, again, I think I've got it pretty close to what was shown. And then it's constructed with this tubing and these little stud things that connects one tube to the next, and that all is fine and dandy. And you've got these little metal rails that come across here, and they hold these paper trays. And the paper trays, again, there were some pretty decent photos. Well, not decent photos, but you could see that little notch in here, and the idea is that one paper tray would slot in and line up with the next. The paper tray's got this little recess underneath, and an upturned lip at the end. And then we have these hanging folders. Now, there's a funny detail here, and it probably looks wrong, and it looks wrong to me as well, but as far as I can tell, that's actually quite accurate. I guess if it was me, I would have had this horizontal tube a little bit lower so that it would be below this curved section, and then that stud could be centered on the tubing. But again, from the TV show, you could see that this horizontal tube was higher, and by being higher, it pushes it off center. If they had pushed that in so that the stud is on the center of the curved tube, then that would have meant that this would have been not vertical, and I guess that would cause issues with standard rail sizes and all the rest. So it looks weird and it looks wrong, but actually I'm pretty sure that's how they did it, and I could even see photos where this was off-center the way that it's shown here. So these hanging rails, they look like that, and you can just pick them up and put them wherever you want. These little labels, obviously I couldn't see any of what that text might have said, so I just made something up. So I've got here X5 computer processor bank 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and that corresponds to these 8 processor banks, and in fact the X5 computer relates to X5 computer that we've got up there. Now the paperwork, as I said before, this paperwork here is pretty close to what was shown in the TV show. That particular paperwork I made up, and the paperwork that we have in here I made up as well. And it's a bit difficult to see, but if I put my head in through the geometry, we can see here It's really just a diagram of one of the processor banks. So you can see here, that's the diagram, and I basically just made up some names for each of the panels of the diagram. So the idea was that the paperwork pretty much just outlined what was in each panel and what configuration was present for each of the processor units. So that's the file cart, how it looks in situ. And we often saw this file cart here. Sometimes we saw it over here against the wall. Other times we saw it down there against on the floor. Other times we saw it over here, on its side because some disaster had impacted the moon. And so that's the file carts. And in fact, let's just have a look at some of the photos. So, and again, here you can see it's obviously up against the wall there. Here we're looking at the back of the file cart, and so they've got 3 of the plastic trays. I deliberately went with 1 and 3 so that we could see how the rails were constructed by having only 1 plastic tray there. So that's that. So there's the file cart down here in the corner, and then the bobby cart in the background. Here you can see it over there. The really bright plastic sleeve. In this photo we can see a red plastic sleeve, or it looks like a plastic sleeve to me, sitting on the top, which is why I did that, sitting on the top there like that. Okay, whole bunch of red plastic sleeves there, and in fact if I come up on top here we can see some more plastic sleeves all over the place. So, okay, so that's the file carts. And the last thing to talk about are the addition of these keyboards and the remote control unit for the Eagle transporter. So this keyboard was pretty standard. It had the 2-tone bass. I'm pretty sure I've got all the text as it was on this particular unit. It was funny. In the early episodes of season 1, this was quite a clean, undamaged object. As you see the photos later on in the season, you can see all sorts of little notches that have been cut out of this base. And I didn't bother putting those in. I mean, if it was this clean in the beginning, I just did it without the cutout notches along the base of that plastic. So that's that keyboard. Now, this keyboard here was a little bit more difficult to model, mainly because there just weren't very good photos available of this here. In fact, if I come over here and I turn on the screenshots, in this screenshot you can see this is probably one of the better photos that I had of that keyboard. And you can see from here you can't really make out much of the details. So you might ask, how did I come up with this detail? Well, I think what happened in the early part of season 1, over here on this desk, we had that keyboard. And in fact, you can even see that keyboard in this photo here. So this photo has that keyboard there. Later on in Season 1, what they did was they got rid of this keyboard and they took this one and they cut this keyboard across here, horizontally. They cut the top off. Well, that's what it looked like to me anyway. It looked like they cut the top off this keyboard or another version of this keyboard, and they simply put it here in this location. And I don't have it in this scene, but there was a pretty decent photo of that keyboard in that location, and from that I got a lot of this this red and black wiring diagram that you see here, and the letters on top of the buttons and so on. So it was a bit of a detective work to get this one modeled as accurately as I could, but I think it's pretty close to what was shown on the TV show. So that's that keyboard. Now over here, I've already spoken about that keyboard. We have this remote control unit, and in fact, if I come to the back here and I turn on the screenshots once more, here we can see a screenshot of that keyboard, as you can see there, and you can sort of make out that there is some writing there and along there. So that's that keyboard, and then we have the remote control unit for the Eagle transporter. Now, this is probably the second best photo that I had of that remote control unit. There was another photo that I found on the Catacombs website, which was a little bit closer in, a little bit sharper photo. So that one helped a lot, but it still wasn't enough for me to see exactly what was going on in some of the cases, at least. So, and you can see here these black and white stripes, which obviously make the thing go much faster. So if I turn that off, and then I come back to the front, here we can see some of the detail close up. And then these dials and so on. So most of this text, or the large text particularly, I could see, and so that's correct. This smaller text up here, I couldn't really see that so clearly. These red labels, that's their usual thing where they take the Letraset sheet and just stick stuff on randomly that has no meaning. These two black panels here and here, they were blurry. I couldn't tell what was going on. That's my best guess. I don't know what it's supposed to be. Yeah, now these two displays here, they're sort of this illuminated display that you could sometimes see in the screenshots. Again, it's all blurry, it's all difficult to tell what's going on. This is my best guess. I think I've got it close, but if I had a good photo, you would see discrepancies between what I've got here and what was in the actual TV show. But I think it's close. The general impression is close anyway, I think. So that's the remote control unit for the Eagle transporters. And I think now that might be, actually, let's just come up here to the mezzanine level. I made another change here to the mezzanine level. There used to be one of those toga chairs in that location. I put this little coffee table in place. Now this is again present in quite a few scenes in Moonbase Alpha. I don't think in fact, you see this quite often in over here in the place of that conference table there. You see a whole bunch of toga chairs and then that table down here. It's a very small table, coffee table. but I don't think I ever saw it up here on the mezzanine level, but it just seemed like a nice place to put it. And so I populated it with a couple of teacup, coffee cup, and some paperwork. And so that's the coffee table that I put up here. Oh, I didn't talk about the throwable items. So these items are throwable. You can see I can pick them up, I can drop them, and they fall. And in fact, they're falling at moon gravity. Now, the lighting on these throwable objects now looks a little bit better to what it did before. Before, it looked really flat and just dull and grey, and it looks better now, but not perfect. What I've done is Unity has something called reflection probes, and the reflection probes are what allow you to see the reflection in these objects. And I've got reflection probes scattered all throughout this volume, and the geometry just picks up those reflection probes. Basically, a reflection probe is like a 360-degree panorama. It's like a sphere, and that gets mapped onto objects. So that's reflection probes, but there is also something called light probes. And light probes are meant for dynamic objects, and they work ideally outside with the sun, and the sun would cast a shadow, and the light probes will pick up the lighting in an environment. Now, in this environment, because the lighting all comes from these area lights, the light probes, so after you've done the light bake, the light probes come in, and again, you sprinkle light probes throughout the whole volume, and they record a general impression of what light is present in that spot, or this spot, or that spot. And then that light is applied to dynamic objects. So for instance, if I come over here against that computer wall, you'll see the light slowly changes on this object. So here, as it's standing next to this dark grey wall, it's less illuminated from that side than it is from this side. And then as we come back to here, where we've got this illuminated wall panel, it's much brighter. So the lighting on these dynamic objects now feels better, but what's not present is shadows. And so, like, if we come over here, you can see the shadow underneath the table. It's very subtle and realistic, and it just looks fantastic. Whereas these dynamic objects don't cast any shadows at all. And that's because it's these area lights, and area lights can't render in real time in a game engine. If this was outside with the sun shining on them, then they would cast shadows. And in these other scenes, like the VIP Eagle, these dynamic objects do cast shadows from the sun, but they don't cast shadows from these area lights. And so it kind of looks fake-ish, or not ish, it looks fake, but it's better than what it was before when I wasn't using light probes. So, so these are dynamic, and we can throw them around. So that's using moon gravity, and if I turn off gravity altogether, now the object will just float and move in with whatever inertia it had before. And so you can pick that up and throw objects around and try to hit other objects. There we go. Impact. So some sort of catastrophe has hit Moonbase Alpha, and they've lost gravity. Oops. And then we can set gravity to moon again. And so we made a big mess of Moonbase Alpha. And so actually this is in contrast. I had a comment from a guy on the YouTube channel Andrea from Italy. He commented on how he quite liked the fact that everything looked clean and pristine and all the rest. So I guess for Andrea, or Andre, here is a messy version of Moonbase Alpha. In fact, if I set the gravity to Earth, I'm so used to throwing this around in moon gravity. Now when I throw it around in Earth gravity, it doesn't feel right. It's much nicer in moon gravity. And in fact, if you click on that, you can see moon gravity is 1.6 meters per second, and Earth is 9.8. So there's a big difference between Earth and Moon. So that's all the changes in main mission and Commander Koenig's office. I do have one other incredibly small change that I did to the launchpad. So here we are in the VIP launchpad scene. In fact, the shadows on that door in particular are a little bit better now, but still there's a little bit of blotchiness there. So the change that I did relates to this sort of equipment platform that sits at this end of the launchpad. Previously, I just had these vertical columns in place, and it was purely accidental. Literally the day before I did the final bake on this, I was looking at some other images, and I thought, and there was a clear view of this structure in the photo, and I thought, oh, I really should just start adding some of the additional beams and so on. So I just spent 10 minutes lining up the perspectives, getting the scale correct to work out the height and the size of the beams and all the rest, and to put them in place. And it really makes a difference. Maybe I was just used to seeing the columns, but now seeing this additional structure, it really has inspired me to pull my finger out and come back to this launchpad and add in all of the additional pressure tanks and cryogenic tanks and the pipe work and all of the extra stuff. It's not going to be easy because there's not a lot of decent photos, and they're all way off in the distance and very blurry and all the rest. And so I kind of struggle with that when there's just not a lot of information to do something. And I don't want to just make it up. I mean, the whole point of this project is to be as accurate as possible. So, but having said that, I think for the next update, I think I will attempt to finish this. And in fact, I think for the next update, I will also attempt to finish the Eagle Transporter, because it's not complete. The thing that's not complete on the Eagle Transporter is this corridor section here and here. Basically, in the model, this corridor wall should not be a perfectly smooth, flat wall. There's all sorts of greebles, pipe work and bumps and lumps and all sorts of things that are present on the wall there. And then also, if I go to the top, also present on the ceiling in those gaps there, and likewise over here as well. So I think I will attempt to finish that on the Eagle Transporter and finish that on the Launchpad. Minor things, but again, they just add to the quality of life, I guess. So, yeah. And so here, actually, this is an example where you can see how these are dynamic objects, and because it's using the sunlight, it's able to calculate the shadows on these objects, even though they are dynamic. Whereas inside the main mission set, there are no shadows because it's using area lights. Now, that object looks way too bright. It's obviously not picking up the shade of this. And in fact, I think it might be picking up a reflection probe, which exists out here in the sunlight. Yeah. So much to learn with lighting. Okay, so that's VIP. If we go to the Diorama Scene, Here's the diorama. You can't see this, but I'm looking at a statistical readout of how my CPU and GPU is handling this scene, and at the moment it's really struggling. Wow, this is bad. I don't know if this is being picked up in the video, but it's it's really laggy. I'll persevere, and I'll just point out that I did end up changing this video in this comlock. If you remember from my last walkthrough, this video was interfering with the video that was in main mission over there. So now I have two different videos, this one and the old one that was on main mission. So that's that. And if you remember, we could go to the options, and instead of having John Koenig here, we could change it to Eleanor Russell. Much prettier option. Okay, so this is the Diorama Scene. Now, the only minor changes that I made to this Diorama Scene is that because I was having some performance issues with this scene, I did end up removing all of the crockery, the paperwork, all of the keyboards, the carts, all the paperwork here and here, and all the cups and so on that I had here. I removed them from the desks, and I also removed it from this desk as well here as well. But other than that, it's all the same as last time for that. Okay, so thank you for sitting through this little walkthrough. I do have a plan for the next video, and it won't be a walkthrough of the VR project. I'm thinking of running through all of my files, all of my 3D files, just showing what the process was in generating them, working out the true scale of objects from the screenshots from the TV show, showing the reference material that I've collected over all this time, and hopefully that's something interesting to people. But in the meantime, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.